The Department of Public Health and Human Services is pleased to bring you Aging Horizons. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, fraud, legal issues, veterans benefits, and caregiving. Aging Horizons is a program dedicated to inform and prepare Montanans on these timely issues, making a difference to you and your loved ones. Here now is today's program host.
Hi everyone. Today on Aging Horizons, we're having our second in a series on cultural diversity in Montana. And joining us will be Ellen Baumler of the Montana Historical Society. You know, it doesn't seem like Montana is very culturally diverse, but you'd be surprised. Ellen has lots of great stories to tell, and we want you to learn about it, so stay tuned. Questions about Medicare and other types of insurance? Contact the State Health Insurance Assistance Program office to get answers to questions like, what is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid? And how do you decide if you need Medicare supplemental insurance? This insurance counseling program is not a sales program. It is available to provide answers to your insurance questions. For more information, call the State Health Insurance Assistance Program office at 1-800-332-2272.
If the Aging Network in Montana was a restaurant, the sign out front would say, over 50 million meals served over the last 30 years. Since adequate nutrition is critical to health and quality of life, nutrition services are an important factor in keeping older Montanans healthy, independent, and living in their community and home. To find out more about senior nutrition programs in your area, call 1-800-551-3191.
Are you looking for a helping hand through the maze of human services, or for information on government programs and benefits that you may qualify for? The Information and Assistance Program provides information on all programs that meet our aging population's basic needs and programs that enhance their lives as well as the lives of their families or caregivers. If you have questions about Medicaid, Medicare, or other services and programs, please call 1-800-551-3191.
I volunteer in schools and meet children who can't stay warm enough at home because their parents can't afford the heating bills. It breaks my heart. I just have to help.
Most of us don't know what it's like to live in a cold house. It makes everything harder, especially for the kids. I've been fortunate in my life and I can afford to help. Why do I do it? I guess you could say it gives me a warm feeling.
If you can help, call Energy Share today or visit us at EnergyShareMT.com.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Aging Horizons, brought to you by the Department of Public Health and Human Services. I'm your host, Kimmy Everman, and we're back with our second in a series on cultural diversity in Montana. And joining us is again our good friend Ellen Baumler of the Montana Historical Society. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you for having me again.
Always great to have you. Now, in our last program, we talked a lot about the Chinese culture that came over after the gold rush. We have some other groups that we're going to talk about today, starting with Native Americans.
Well, I think we have to start with Native Americans because they were here long before any white settlers came or anybody else, and that is Montana's first culture. And I think our tribes do a really good job of maintaining their traditions and really sharing their traditions with the public through powwows and community events like that. But you know, there are other ethnic groups that, like the African Americans, for example, and the Chinese, whose stories really haven't ever been told. And so, African Americans is another group that has been very much overlooked. And part of that, I think, is because, first of all, historians are guilty in really not trying to seek out those stories. They do exist, but it's rather difficult to find them. And also, it's because, you know, like the Chinese, they didn't really leave a lot of primary documents. They didn't really keep journals. They worked very, very hard, and they, you know, was probably not something that they thought about. And oftentimes, they carried the burden of slavery, and they really didn't want to think about their you know, where they came from.
Right.
And so, unfortunately, those are the stories that we want to know because they are really interesting. And as we said before, you know, it is our identities that define us. And so anyway, historians have been recently making an effort to seek out the African American stories because they were a small percentage of the population, but really made a surprising impact and left us some very rich legacies. One person I think that some people may have heard of is Sarah Bickford, who was actually inducted into the Hall of Outstanding Montanans in the Capitol a few years ago. And she's been touted as one of Montana's very first businesswomen. She was born into slavery, and with the emancipation in 1865 went to live with an aunt in Tennessee, in Memphis. And she was offered an opportunity to come west with the family as the governess to the children in exchange for her passage. So she came by covered wagon with the Murphy family. The Murphy family didn't stay in Virginia City very long, but Sarah decided to stay. She married. And it's very interesting because the person's last name was Brown that she married, and with a name like that, it's really hard to trace someone with a common name like that. So we have no idea really whether that person was black or white. And anyway, she had had 3 children with him, and 2 of them died of an epidemic. And she was left with one daughter, Eva, and her husband was very abusive. She had the courage to take him to court. She hired an attorney, took him to court, sued for divorce, sued for custody of Eva, won, and the husband disappears. We never hear from him again. But then a few years after that, Eva died, and she is left with nothing. And this is it's a kind of common pioneer story, but it's even more poignant, I think, when you look at Sarah's background. You know, she just had so much loss. As a slave, her parents were sold away from her when she was little, and she never saw them again. So she did have a rather tragic background anyway. But she started over, and this time married Stephen Bickford, who was a white miner, part owner of a water company in Virginia City. And he died in 1900, leaving her with 4 or more children.
Oh, dear.
And so she took business courses by correspondence, learned how to run the water company, bought the other shares, and until her death in about 1930, so she, she went door to door collecting bills. Think how hard that would be for anybody, to collect money from your neighbors, you know.
And I think of at a time when women were not expected
and
to behave in this way.
particularly African American women. I mean, she really did rise above everything and really lived an incredible life. And then there's Mary Fields, who people know about her. She drove the stage between Cascade and St. Peter's Mission for many years. And Julian Anderson, who was the bartender at the Montana Club, the exclusive Montana Club, for 63 years.
Oh, wow.
You know, lived to be 101 or 102. Mary Gordon of White Sulphur Springs, who was born into slavery, married John Francis Gordon, who was actually born a free person of color in Scotland. And he was a professionally trained chef, and the 2 of them came west to cook for the mining camps and ended up in White Sulphur Springs. She had 5 children. With the 5th one was on the way when John went up to join the Alaskan gold rush, thinking he could do better for his family, and was killed in a train crash. So she was left with 5 children. One of them grew up to be very famous gospel singer Taylor Gordon, and her daughter, one of her daughters, Rose, went to physiotherapy school and had a practice in White Sulphur Springs. So, you know, incredible stories, really, incredible stories.
Backed up with so much work,
so much
loss,
work, and absolutely,
you know, so much went into that, but some really poignant,
very poignant stories. Yes, and people we should know about.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. Well, you know, folks, as I said when we started, you might be surprised at how culturally rich and diverse Montana really is, and has been for a number of years. We have a whole lot more to tell you about, and again, you might be surprised at what you have to hear. Ellen has some great stories to tell us, and we wouldn't want you to miss anything, so please stay with us.
I take care of my wife at home. When I found out training was available, I said, sign me up. It's made a huge difference.
When my husband was injured at work, it was life-altering. The classes taught me that it's okay to grieve, to ask for help, and to better cope as a caregiver.
My dad lives 4 hours away, and the Powerful Tools classes taught me that it's okay to ask for help. I highly recommend them.
To find out about this course for caregivers, go to respite.mt.gov.
It's amazing the difference a little training can make.
I had a pain in my neck and jaw. I was just short of breath. I was just so nauseous. I had a tremendous pressure in my chest. My heart felt like it was going to burst. I didn't know it, but I was having a heart attack. A heart attack. I could have died.
Know these warning signs and call 911 immediately. Symptoms of heart attack in women are often not recognized. New medications and treatments can prevent disability and save your life.
I didn't know. Montana has one of the highest suicide rates in the country.
Know the signs.
Depression. Isolation. Giving away possessions.
Alcohol abuse.
It's what you can do now that matters.
Don't be afraid to ask. Are you suicidal? Tell someone.
Don't leave the person alone.
Offer hope. Call the Lifeline.
Don't keep suicide a secret.
Break the silence.
How are you filing your taxes this year? Let MontanaFreeFile.org help. We offer tax assistance, and like the name says, it's free. We can also help you receive your maximum refund in as little as 8 days, at no charge. Want to get started? Just click on any of these tabs. It's all the information you'll need. Great step-by-step instruction and completely free. Log on to MontanaFreeFile.org or call 800-666-6899. This tax season, don't just file, free file.
Welcome back to Aging Horizons. We're here with Ellen Baumler. Ellen, we've been talking about cultural diversity, and one of the things that caught my eye in some of the notes you sent me was the Buffalo Soldiers. What's that about?
Buffalo Soldiers were the black cavalry and infantry. That was really the only military opportunity open to African Americans right after the Civil War. Those units were created, and mostly they were sent to the rather remote places in the West. Buffalo Soldiers spent quite a bit of time in the Southwest, guarding telephone lines. They served in the campaigns against Geronimo. The first Buffalo Soldiers came to Montana in 1889, both infantry and cavalry, and they were stationed at all of the Montana forts: Fort Assiniboine, Fort Missoula, Fort Custer, outside of Billings. And they, they made some pretty interesting contributions, actually. The guys that were stationed at Fort Missoula made this incredible bicycle trip. In 1896, they rode 1,900 miles in the summertime through all kinds of weather from Fort Missoula to St. Louis.
Oh, wow.
They were testing the feasibility of bicycles instead of horses for the Army. And, I mean, it was just a grueling trip through ice and snow and parched deserts. And their bicycles, along with their gear, weighed 70 pounds. So they were called Iron Riders, and it's a very well-known incident, actually, in the history of the Fort Missoula. But they were successful, and as they rode into St. Louis, 1,000 riders came out to greet them and escorted them in. But then, of course, the Army decided, no, we don't really want to use bicycles anyway.
I was going to say, that doesn't seem like that'd be a good choice.
Many of the soldiers that were stationed here in Montana served in the Spanish-American War. One that I wanted to mention was William Davis, who was stationed at Fort Assiniboine, and he invented this fabulous saddle that even today is known as a Davis saddle. Oh. And the black cavalry were always assigned the worst worst horses to ride, that they weren't broken. They were very hard trotting horses, and it was very uncomfortable. They were days and days in the saddle and that kind of thing. So William Davis invented this saddle that had springs in the seat.
Oh, wow.
And springs on the stirrups, and patented it, actually. And it did become, never was actually standard issue, but it did become used by gentlemen riders as well as the military. Also, Horace Bivens, who's really a very prominent, very well-known person in the Billings area, fought in the Spanish-American War. He had this fabulous dog named Booth who went with him. And Horace Bivens fought in the battle at San Juan Hill right next to Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. And, you know, to hear historians tell, Roosevelt saved the day, but in fact, it was those black soldiers.
Those Buffalo soldiers.
The Buffalo soldiers that really did save Teddy Roosevelt's bacon, and the other men too.
Well, it would seem to me what you've described sounds like men who have been tried and tested and must give their best every moment of every day.
Absolutely. They were incredible soldiers, and you know, we really should commemorate them, remember them. Another very interesting African American is Samuel Lewis of Bozeman, who was a sleight of hand expert and a barber who came from the West Indies. He was a free person of color and financed the education of his sister, Edmonia. With the money that he made quite a fortune in bathhouses and barbershops in Bozeman. Edmonia Lewis was trained in Florence, Italy, and Paris, France in sculpture. And she became the very first African American to celebrate the emancipation. In about 1867, she created this beautiful sculpture called Forever Free, and it is at Howard University today. So she's, you know, is a very, very prominent, well-known African American. Mamie Bridgewater is another person. The Bridgewater family in Helena was very well known, and Mamie came with her husband, who was a Buffalo soldier stationed at Fort Harrison after the Spanish-American War. But Mamie had a number of children. One of her daughters, Octavia, never married, but she went to nursing school. She graduated from high school in 1925 and went to one of two African-American nursing schools. She went to the Lincoln School of Nursing in the Bronx in New York City.
Oh, wow.
Studied for 5 years, came back to Helena, and of course, the hospital didn't hire African Americans. So she did private duty nursing and then became one of the first African American nurses to join the Army during World War II and served. And finally, when she came back, she was hired at St. Peter's Hospital and spent a very long career in the maternity department. So, you know, these people really, they made great contributions.
Great stories.
Yeah.
So, you know, as far as we can say, which isn't that far, but what do you think it was like to be black in Montana?
I think it must have been very, very difficult. You know, we have an interview from Norman Howard back in the 1960s, who was a resident here of Helena, and his family is still here in town, but he talks about how he had to learn to live in two different worlds. There were one set of rules at home and another set of rules in public. And while Montana didn't really have no whites only signs, there were those undercurrents.
And implications.
And implications. He couldn't go to a barbershop and have his hair cut, you know. He couldn't eat in restaurants. And, you know, it was just an unspoken rule. And people, they would get into a lot of trouble if they broke those rules.
Good things, we've had some changes and we have more stories to tell you, so come on back, we'll be here.
The face of the American workforce is changing. People are healthier, living longer, and living better. Baby boomers are a valuable resource for the workplace of today and tomorrow. They're still active and eager to help. Experience, dedication, wisdom, these are just some of the significant assets older workers bring to the job. Age is an asset, experience a benefit.
seems like the power bills just get higher and higher every year. I'm on a fixed income and it just doesn't keep up. I hate to do it, but sometimes I have to choose between my meds and staying warm.
No one should ever have to choose between staying well and staying warm. If you need help paying your heating bills, call us today to find out if you qualify. Help is available for both homeowners and renters.
The cold gets into your bones and you can't get it out.
Here in Montana, we love our outdoor activities. Unfortunately, few of them are risk-free. Indeed, Montana is second in the nation per capita in head injuries that can destroy the lives of people we love. That's why you should insist your family always wear protective helmets. But you can do even more. When you fill out your vehicle registration this year, circle the Y and donate $1 to support traumatic brain injury prevention and education. Now that's using the old noggin.
Every generation produces heroes, men and women who step forward to defend our country in time of need, no matter the personal cost to themselves. And though we can never fully repay them, we can make sure they have access to low-cost, long-term care when they need it. That's what Montana's Veterans Homes are all about. If you've got a hero in need in your family, call us. We can help.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Aging Horizons. We're here with Ellen Baumler of the Montana Historical Society talking about cultural diversity in Montana. Ellen, when we left our last segment, we were just about to discuss a segregation law that went into effect.
Right. The territorial legislature passed this segregation law in 1872 that mandated segregation of schools. And if you think about it, you know, yes, we had a dynamic African-American population, but it was never very big. And some communities, like White Sulphur Springs, for example, had one family that was African-American. Wow. So how are you going to have separate schools, you know, for one family of kids? Right. And so in 1880, early 1880s, by public vote, that law was rescinded, and we never had segregated schools after that, you know. But it just didn't, it wasn't feasible, fortunately. Yeah. But the intent was there, you know, in the beginning.
Do you think that really it was mainly because it wasn't feasible physically that they actually rescinded it?
I think so, yeah, because I think that there was a lot of unspoken prejudice. I think it wasn't overt. You know, but I do think that it was difficult for those folks to live. We never did have segregated neighborhoods either in most of our communities in Montana, just because there weren't enough African Americans to make a whole neighborhood. And so they were interspersed with all of our middle-class neighborhoods across Montana.
So small blessings
So
anyway.
small blessings, that's exactly right.
Now, we were going to talk about John Duncan.
Yes, John Duncan is Butte's first and probably only African-American physician.
Oh, okay.
And his story, I think, is really interesting, too. He came from Texas. In 1899, he came to Butte. He may have practiced chiropody, which is the care of the foot, which is a lot of African Americans practiced that trade along with barbering, because it was something that you could learn from a manual. Oh, okay. And it was a necessary service. And so I don't know that for sure, but I would bet that he practiced that, had a barbershop of his own until 1920, when he decided to, at the age of 46, go to medical school. And he went to medical school at the University of Massachusetts, became a licensed podiatrist, started the professional organizations related to that field here in Montana, and practiced for, you know, several decades. And then his son followed in his footsteps, and the footsteps, no pun. But the two of them practiced together in Butte for many, many years. And you know, that's just a wonderful success story, I think.
Really
and they performed a service, and there were no other podiatrists, you know, so that was a really, really wonderful thing. And Annie Morgan is
I want to talk about Annie Morgan.
Another person that I really love her, because her story is rather unusual. She came west. We're not sure. She may have been attached to a military family cooking for for this family that was stationed at one of the forts here. But she did eventually homestead along Rock Creek. She became known as a healer because she was able to take this, the uncle of the county attorney who had a horrible was a horrible alcoholic. And she took him and secluded him and really nursed him through withdrawal and everything, and he became an upstanding citizen after that.
Long for rehab.
Then she came across this guy on the banks of the river who was very, very ill with typhoid, and she took him home and nursed him through, and that's a very difficult thing, to nurse someone through typhoid. People don't usually survive that, but she was able to heal him, so she became known as a healer. And her homestead is now a Forest Service cabin that you can actually rent. But when they began to renovate this cabin, up in the door frame, they found her root bag. A root bag is something that West African healers would carry with all of their accoutrements that might include things that they would use for herbal treatments and also for spells and things like that. And so in this root bag were a homemade wooden carved spatula, red and gray string, and you know, a paper soap wrapper. You know, and we don't know what those items might have been used for, but they were consistent with other West African root bags, you know, from you know, slave quarters and that kind of thing. So she learned this art somehow, maybe from a relative, maybe from someone that she was in slavery with, you know, and brought it all the way to Montana.
What a treasure.
You know, I mean, it really is a treasure. We have a lot of other cultural treasures here in Montana, too.
I guess because we're running out of time, I kind of wanted to ask you how you felt about, you know, why is it so important for us to preserve our roots and celebrate these things?
Well, unless we know where we're going, we can't know where we've
been.
Unless we know where we've been, we can't really know where we're going. And so I think that cultural identities really are what define us. And if you don't know what your roots were, and you don't have those traditions that you pass down, you know, we do lose some of our cultural identity in that way. And people can come to the Historical Society, to the Research Center, and research those things, you know. We have wonderful, wonderful cultural treasures here in Montana. For example, the Serbian Church in Butte is an incredible cultural treasure. And we had a very large Jewish community also in Montana. And the first temple between St. Paul and Portland was built in Helena in 1890. It's now the office of the Catholic Diocese.
See,
you know,
I told you that our audience would be surprised, because I know that I am very surprised.
Yeah.
Ellen, it's been great having you here. I hope you'll come back again.
Thank you so much.
You always have such fun stories to tell, and we learn a lot. You know, folks, we really do have a culturally rich state, and it's so much fun to learn. So come on over to the Montana Historical Society. For Aging Horizons, I'm Kim Yeverman, and thanks for being with us.
Special thanks to the Department of Public Health and Human Services for their continued support. Hosts on Aging Horizons are program specialists at the Montana Office on Aging. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions. For more information about Aging Horizons, call the Department of Public Health and Human Services toll-free at 800-332-2272.